Welcome back to 340. This is the second of three conversations about the architecture of human connection. Last time we explored the two foundations we feel first: safety and attraction. Today we turn to direction, because love on its own does not tell us where we're going. Shared values and vision, and expansion. Foundation 3 is shared values and vision. If safety is the foundation and attraction is the energy, then shared values and vision provide direction. Because no matter how much two people love each other, sooner or later life will ask a difficult question. Where are we going? For many years, I thought love would answer that question. I think a lot of us actually do. We meet someone, we fall in love, we feel deeply connected. The chemistry is strong, the conversations flow. We feel seen, we feel alive. We tell ourselves that if the feelings are powerful enough, the rest will somehow just work itself out. Sometimes it does. Many times it doesn't. One of the hardest lessons I've learned is that love and compatibility are not the same thing. Two people can genuinely love each other and still be trying to build completely different lives. Neither person is wrong. Neither person is broken. They're simply following different maps. One person dreams of stability, the other dreams of adventure. One wants children, the other doesn't. One wants to build roots, the other wants to remain free to move wherever life leads. One values certainty, the other values possibility. Love doesn't automatically solve those differences. In fact, sometimes love makes them even more painful. Because now there is something worth losing. As I've gotten older, I've become less interested in finding someone who agrees with me about everything. That sounds exhausting. I don't need someone who shares every opinion, every interest, or every perspective. Some of the most fascinating people I've met see the world very differently from me. The question isn't whether two people think alike. The question is whether they are moving in roughly the same direction. Shared values are not about agreement. They're about alignment. They're the principles that help us make decisions when life becomes complicated. They're the things we return to when certainty disappears. They're the deeper answers to questions such as: what matters most? How do we want to live? What kind of people do we want to become? What role does family play? What role does freedom play? What role does growth play? What does commitment mean? What does integrity mean? How do we treat other people? How do we handle conflict? How do we face hardship? Many of these conversations never happen early in relationships. Instead, people talk about hobbies, movies, travel, music, food, all of which are enjoyable. But very few people sit down and ask, what kind of life are we actually trying to create? Yet that question may be one of the most important questions two people can ask each other. Because relationships are not only about who we are today, they're also about who we're going to be tomorrow. I've often reflected on something I see in both relationships and leadership. When there is no shared vision, people begin pulling in different directions. Not because they don't care, not because they're selfish, because they're trying to reach different destinations. Imagine two people in a boat, both rowing with commitment, both working hard, and both genuinely wanting the relationship to succeed. If they are rowing toward different shores, effort alone won't save them. In fact, more effort can sometimes create more frustration. The problem isn't commitment. The problem is direction. This is why I believe shared vision is so important. Not because life unfolds exactly as planned, it never does. Life will surprise us. Plans will change. Circumstances will shift. The vision matters because it creates a horizon. A shared horizon allows two people to navigate uncertainty together. Without it, every major decision becomes a negotiation. With it, decisions become easier because they're guided by something larger than the immediate moment. I've become increasingly aware that one of the things I value most in a relationship is the feeling that we're building something together. Not simply sharing experiences, building a life, a future, a story, a direction. Something larger than either of us could create alone. That doesn't require identical dreams. It requires compatible dreams. Dreams that can coexist. Dreams that support rather than compete with one another. One of the most beautiful things I've observed in healthy relationships is that both people remain individuals while still becoming part of something larger. They don't lose themselves. They don't surrender their identity. They don't disappear into the relationship. Instead, their individual path begins supporting a shared path. There's a sense of partnership, a sense of moving together, a sense that both people are contributing to something meaningful. When that exists, the relationship becomes a source of stability, not because everything is predictable, because both people know what they're building toward. As I look back on my own life, I realized that some relationships ended not because there was a lack of love. They ended because there was a lack of alignment. At the time, that felt heartbreaking. Today, I see it differently. Love is not always enough to build a life together. Sometimes love teaches us something important and then asks us to let go. Other times, love finds alignment and creates something capable of lasting for decades or a lifetime. The difference often lies in whether two people are walking toward the same horizon. This foundation ultimately comes down to a simple but powerful question. Are we building toward the same future? Not the exact same picture, not the exact same details, but the same horizon, the same direction, the same deeper vision for what our meaningful lives look like. Because attraction may bring us together, safety may allow us to stay connected, but shared values and vision help us move forward together. And without a shared direction, even the strongest connection can eventually lose its way. When I think about shared values and vision, I realize this is one of the lessons life taught me later than I would have liked to. For a long time, I believed that love would somehow solve everything. If two people loved each other deeply enough, surely they could overcome almost any difference. A part of me still wants to believe that. Love is powerful. Love matters. Love changes us. Yet experience has taught me that love and alignment are not the same thing. I've seen relationships where there was a genuine affection, respect, and care, yet something still wasn't working. Not because either person was wrong, not because either person lacked commitment, because they were moving toward different futures. The older I get, the less interested I become in finding someone who agrees with me about everything. It sounds exhausting. What matters far more is whether we're building toward a similar horizon. Do we want a similar kind of life? Do we share similar values? Do we view growth, family, freedom, intimacy, and commitment in compatible ways? What I've learned is that values often reveal themselves during difficult moments. Anyone can agree when life is easy. Values become visible when life becomes complicated, when sacrifices are required, when priorities collide, when uncertainty appears. That is when we discover what truly matters. Today, one of the things I find most attractive is a sense of shared direction. Not certainty, not a detailed roadmap. Simply the feeling that we're walking toward a something together. That there is a future both people genuinely want to build. Because while love may bring two people together, shared vision often determines whether they can keep moving forward side by side. Few lessons have been more difficult for me to accept than this one. Love is not always enough. For much of my life, I believed that if two people truly loved one another, they would eventually find a way. Whenever relationships became difficult, I assumed the answer was to love more deeply or simply hold on a little longer. I was asking love to answer questions that belonged somewhere else. Two people can genuinely love one another and still discover that they're trying to build very different lives. The attraction was never false. It simply could not answer questions about direction or the life each person genuinely wanted to create. Relationships do not always end because someone failed. Sometimes they end because two good people are trying to honor two different truths. Love should never ask us to become less of ourselves in order to remain together. The healthiest relationships are the ones where love and direction slowly become the same path. The fourth foundation, expansion. This is the foundation that feels most personal to me. It's also the one I hear discussed the least. We talk endlessly about love, communication, boundaries, attachment, trust, conflict. Yet very few people ask what I believe may be one of the most important questions in any relationship. Does this relationship make my life bigger or smaller? The older I get, the more important that question becomes. For much of my life, I unconsciously believed that commitment required sacrifice. Not healthy sacrifice, contraction. The idea that relationships inevitably meant giving things up. Less freedom, less spontaneity, less adventure, less possibility. In many ways, modern culture reinforces that idea. Listen carefully to how people often talk about relationships. They talk about settling down, giving up options, losing freedom, being tied down, compromising, making sacrifices. The language itself suggests limitation, as though love and freedom somehow exist in opposition to one another, as though intimacy requires confinement, as though commitment is the price we pay for connection. Yet, when I look at the healthiest and most inspiring relationships I've encountered, I see something entirely different. I see expansion. I see people becoming more themselves, not less. I see people taking bigger risks, following bigger dreams, expressing more of who they are, living more fully, creating more, loving more, experiencing more life. The relationship becomes a source of energy rather than a drain on it. I've come to believe that one of the greatest misunderstandings about relationships is the idea that another person is meant to complete us. The reality is that no one can carry that responsibility. No human being can become the source of another person's happiness, purpose, healing, and fulfillment. That is too heavy a burden for anyone to carry. The healthiest relationships I've witnessed involve two people who are already engaged with life. Two people who have interests, passions, curiosity, purpose, friendships, and dreams. Not because they don't need each other, but because they're already alive before they meet. When those two people come together, something fascinating happens. The relationship becomes a multiplier. Not an addition, a multiplier. I've often described this as 1 plus 1 equals 3. Not because the relationship completes either person, because together they create something neither could create alone. A shared reality, a shared journey, a shared energy, a shared possibility. Something new enters the world because both people exist within it. That has become one of the most important things I look for. Not simply whether I enjoy being with someone, not simply whether we have chemistry, not simply whether we love one another, but whether the relationship itself creates expansion. Do I feel more alive? Do I feel more creative? Do I feel more connected to life? Do I feel more courageous? Do I feel more myself? Those questions reveal a great deal. Because the truth is that some relationships slowly shrink us. Not intentionally, not maliciously, often through fear. Fear of change, fear of uncertainty, fear losing control, fear of growth. Over time, two people can begin negotiating away parts of themselves. A dream here, a passion there, a friendship, a curiosity, an adventure, a piece of themselves. Not because they want to, because it feels easier, safer, and less disruptive. Years later, they wake up wondering where their aliveness went, where their spark disappeared, where they disappeared. I think many people confuse stability with expansion. The two are not the same. Stability matters deeply, but stability without growth can become stagnation. Safety without expansion can become comfort. And comfort, while pleasant, is not always where life lives. Life often exists just beyond the edge of comfort. This is something I've observed not only in relationships, but in leadership, teams, and my own personal development. The healthiest environments are not those that protect people from growth. They're the ones that support growth. They create enough safety for people to take risks, enough trust for people to be vulnerable, enough encouragement for people to become more of who they are. Relationships are no different. The right relationships does not ask us to abandon ourselves. It creates the conditions for us to discover more of ourselves. I sometimes think about the people who have had the greatest impact on my life. The mentors, friends, partners, people I've loved. The thing they all have in common is not that they made life easier. Many of them didn't. The thing they gave me was expansion. They challenged me, inspired me, encouraged me. They believed in me. Helped me see possibilities I couldn't yet see myself. The relationship became larger than comfort. It became a catalyst. That is why I believe the strongest partnerships are not built on dependency. They're built on mutual expansion. Two people standing beside one another and saying, I want your world to become bigger because I'm in it. Not smaller, not safer, not more controlled. Bigger, more alive, more fully expressed. For me, that may be one of the clearest signs of a healthy relationship. When both people become increasing themselves over time, not because they're independent of one another, but because they're supported by one another. At its best, love is not a cage. It's not a contract of limitation. It's not a narrowing of possibility. At its best, love becomes an amplifier, a force that helps both people step more fully into life. Which leads to perhaps the most important question of this entire foundation. Does this relationship help me become more fully alive? Not happier all the time, not more comfortable all the time, more alive. Because when a relationship creates that feeling, something remarkable is happening. Two lives are not simply running in parallel, they're expanding each other. And that is where 1 + 1 truly becomes 3. Of all the foundations, expansion may be the one that resonates most deeply with me. Perhaps because I've spent much of my life searching for aliveness, not excitement, not constant happiness, aliveness. The feeling that life is unfolding, that there's still more to discover, more to learn, more to experience, more of myself to uncover. When I look back on the most important relationships in my life, one thing stands out. The people who had the greatest impact on me were not necessarily the people who made life easier. They were the people who made life bigger. Some challenged me, some inspired me. Some believed in me before I fully believed in myself. Some encouraged me to take risks I might have never taken alone. Each of them expanded my world in some way. That idea has become increasingly important as I've grown older. I no longer want a relationship that simply works. I want a relationship that creates life. A relationship that inspires both people to become more fully themselves, more courageous, creative, more honest, and more present. I think many people fear commitment because they unconsciously associate it with contraction, the loss of freedom, the loss of possibility, the loss of self. I've experienced moments where I've feared that too. Yet the healthiest relationships I witness create the opposite effect. They generate freedom. Not because there are no responsibilities, because both people feel supported enough to fully engage with life. That is what I mean when I say 1 + 1 = 3. The relationship itself becomes a source of energy. Something new enters the world because both people are together. A shared vision, a shared adventure, a shared purpose, and a shared story. And the older I get, the more I realize that I don't want a relationship that asks me to become less. I want a relationship that invites both people to become more human, more alive, more fully expressed. That, to me, feels like one of the clearest signs of healthy love. There's an expression that has followed me through all of this, and I've mentioned it now a few times. 1 + 1 becomes 3. The first time people hear it, they usually smile. It sounds impossible. Mathematics tells us that 1 + 1 will always equal 2. Human relationships belong to a very different kind of reality. Every meaningful relationship contains a third element that is easy to overlook, because it cannot be touched or measured. It exists in the space between two people. It is created through thousands of conversations, moments of repair, quiet evenings where very little is said at all. Slowly, that invisible space begins developing a character of its own. The third element is not a child, a family, or a shared home. It's the relationship itself. Tend to that space, and it begins to expand both of you. That is where we'll leave it for today. Shared values, which gives us a horizon. An expansion, which asks whether love makes our lives bigger or smaller. Next time, the final foundation, the one that decides whether all the others survive. A commitment to growth. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until the next time, stay honest, stay present, and stay human.